Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I hope everyone had a nice holiday last week, and everyone who celebrates Happy Hanukkah. A bit late getting this episode out. All right, I'm a lot late getting this episode out. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to be profiling someone I actually knew in person. It's the person who really inspired me to study history, Mrs. Faye Gates, my high school history teacher. At the time when I was in high school back in the 1980s, I had no idea that Mrs. Gates was doing so much community work and was really kind of a big deal. So she was just my favorite teacher. I just really liked her. She did a great job teaching high school to a bunch of people who really didn't care most of the time. So let's just kind of dive in. Eddie Faye Gates was born in Preston, Oklahoma, attended the Tuskegee Institute, graduated from the University of North Dakota, and then later got an additional degree from the University of Tulsa. She started her teaching career in Tulsa in 1968 and taught high school for 22 years before she went into an administrative role. She wrote 3 books after retiring from teaching, and she was an education consultant, a Holocaust education consultant. She advocated for reparations for the survivors of the Tulsa Race Massacre, and sadly she passed away in 2021 at the age of 87. I remember a lot of really interesting stuff going on in her class. She really worked hard to make history interesting and more personal for us. I remember her telling the story of when she was young and getting married. She was living in Arkansas at the time, and she talked about how the dress shop where she bought her wedding dress would not allow her to try on any dresses because she was black. Only white patrons were allowed to try on the clothes. And it's one thing, to read about this kind of discrimination, but to hear about it directly from someone who lived it, it was more meaningful, impactful in a way. As a teenager, I had worked in retail, and the idea of a paying customer not being allowed to try on clothes was really shocking to think about for me. And it brought home the kind of discrimination that people had faced in very recent history. Um, Although as a teenager, things that had happened 30 years ago seemed like a longer time ago, but in the lifetime of somebody that I was talking to, that was a big deal when you're 15, 16 years old. Mrs. Gates always brought in really interesting substitutes who were more like guest speakers. I know there was a Holocaust survivor she brought in who talked about fleeing the Nazis on his bicycle. She brought in Native Americans who could tell us about their culture and their story. It really made history alive. And I'm pretty sure that the kids in her classes were the only ones in the 1980s in Tulsa who learned about the Tulsa Race Massacre in school. No one talked about it then. No one talked about it back then. Yeah. My younger brother did not learn about it at his school in the 90s, and he went to a very prestigious private school in Tulsa. He found out about it years later on a podcast, and he asked me if I had ever heard about the Tulsa Race Massacre, and he was shocked that I actually had learned about it in school. My mother didn't know anything about it, and she grew up in Tulsa. Um, so Mrs. Gates really brought an extra dimension to our history class. I had her for Oklahoma history and both U.S. histories, I think. But I had a different teacher for world history, so but yeah, I'm going to include relevant links to Mrs. Gates's books. Well, I'm going to include the titles of the books so you can look them up, and links to some information you can find on Mrs. Gates. I know that at Gilcrease they have a whole section on the Tulsa Race Massacre that is dedicated to her. Although Gilcrease Museum, I believe, is closed right now for some renovations, or basically they're rebuilding the whole building. I don't know when they're going to be finished because I don't live in Tulsa anymore. But I highly recommend reading her books if you have an interest in history. So, I hope you all enjoyed hearing about one of my favorite people. I strongly encourage you to read the books. But I'm guessing you are interested if you're here. So, I have started researching the series I'm planning to do on the history of healthcare in the US, but that's going to take quite a while. If it gives you an idea, the audiobook version of one of the books I got on the subject is 25 hours long. So reading and annotating and summarizing and coming up with a script on that is maybe February before that happens. Thanks for watching or listening. I'll try to get back to my regular Friday upload schedule now that the holidays are over. Well, it's not New Year's yet, but you know what I mean. Like and subscribe if you are so inclined, and remember, be kind to one another.